Good evening.
Turn down the volume on yours.
Good evening. Good evening.
Just a bit of feedback.
Bit of feedback.
Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test.
Test, test, test.
Why that?
Test, test, test. Test, test, test. That better? No. Test. Yep. Okay, right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Strategic Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Barbara Blake. I'm the chair. If the committee can introduce themselves, please, starting on my left.
Resurrect Vice Chair, member for Tottenham Hill.
Sean O'Donovan, councillor for Tottenham Hale as well.
Lester Buxton, Crouch End.
Alex Worrell, councillor for Stroud Green.
Councillor John Bevan, Northumberland Park.
Thank you. The officers present can introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Cody Sprock, Principal Committee Coordinator.
Justin Parley, legal officer.
Rob Chasovsky, Assistant Director, Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Catherine Smith, Head of DM and Planning.
Bryce Tubble, Head of Spatial Planning.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if there are any other officers in attendance virtually, but if they are, they'll introduce themselves when relevant. So we're on to item 1, which is filming at meetings. This meeting is being recorded. All registered speakers should be aware that they will be recorded for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting. Item 2 is apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Collette and Councillor Ibrahim, and Councillor Bartlett has notified us that she will be late. Item 3 is urgent business, and there are no items of urgent business. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay, thank you. So there are no item 5, deputations, petitions, presentations and questions, and we've received no requests for those. So we are on to item 6, which is the minutes, pages 1 to 36 in the pack. So can we approve these, please? Councillor O'Donovan.
It's just a matter arising from the minutes. Item number 9, the infrastructure funding statement. Thank you for the correspondence related that the new draft one isn't ready for discussion at this meeting, but will be discussed at a future meeting. But you also very kindly offered a briefing to committee members who want it in relation to the process of this drawing up this statement and how SIL and 106 money is calculated and used, both at the moment, but obviously also as a lead up to the next report.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor. So yes, we will bring it to the next Strategic Planning Committee, which will be around about July time. Apologies, it's not ready for this committee meeting, but nevertheless, in the meantime, we will organise a meeting for councillors that want to have a catch up on that in the meantime. So we'll get that briefing organised. So yeah, very happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor O'Donovan. So are we content to agree the minutes of the meeting? Okay, that's the minutes of the 17th of October. Okay, so we're now on to item 7, and that's planning and building control, which is pages 5 to 30 in the pack. And I'll pass over to Rob Shizowski to give the report on this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is our usual quarterly report, and as usual, we'll break it down into there's different sections. So Catherine Smith will talk about the National Planning Reforms and Development Management and Enforcement section, which is from around about page 10. Then we'll take Q&A on that bit. Then we'll go to Bryce Tudwell, Head of Spatial Planning, who will cover the Spatial Planning section, which is from page 22. And then back to me, I will cover the Building Control section from page 26, as the Head of Building Control, Dennis, is on leave. So I will cover that bit and we'll take questions for each section. So if that's okay, we'll start off with Catherine, who will kick off with the National Planning Reforms and the Development Management update from page 10. Over to Catherine.
Thanks, Rob. Evening, members. So I have some slides to present to you on screen, about 15 of them. It won't take terribly long. So talking about planning reform, so as Rob said, pages 6 to 9 of the agenda set out further announcements on the national planning reforms. The King's Speech last summer set the scene with proposals to come forward to improve local decision making and modernise planning committees. In September then of last year, the government published a working paper to explore ways to lower the risk, cost and uncertainty with securing planning permission on brownfield lands. They incorporated updated policy on brownfield land with emerging national DM policies, which will have the same weight as local London plan policies, and stated that they would expect that development should be at least 4 stories high, fronting principal roads, and that they were not looking to do this through permitted development rights extension of. In December then, an updated guidance document was set out, giving information on changes such as increased transparency on the use of extensions of time agreements, and that will be through a new dashboard. And they also changed the assessment period for the speed of making decisions from 24 months to 12 months. And then also in December, a busy month for planning, there was key changes to the NPPF. I'm just going to point out what the main ones are. So there would be an increased emphasis on the delivery of social rent housing, changes to Greenbelt policy, including grey belt and golden rules, a stronger support for energy efficiency and low carbon heating, a vision-led approach to promoting sustainable transport, also stronger powers to refuse hot food takeaways, and then changes in the operation of the 5-year housing land supply requirement and the additional buffer. Then we had a further update to the NPPF in 2025, just in February, and that was really minor clarifications around the NPPF. And then we are expecting a planning and infrastructure bill in the spring, where planning can set their own fees, each local authority can. And we also are looking to work with neighbouring boroughs as to how we might achieve that. So the government were busy, as I say, towards the end of last year. They published their working paper on planning committees as well. And as part of this, they are hoping to provide clarity and consistency across the board nationally on whether applications need to go to be decided by planning committee or whether they can be dealt with by officers. They're considering a national scheme of delegation, and the options for that are set out on this slide, with Haringey's current scheme of delegation akin to option 3, with Delhi as default with a prescriptive list of exceptions where cases should go to committee. The government are also considering the matter set out on this slide. So firstly, whether to have a threshold for cases which should be reported to planning committee, or what could be done locally. So they're looking at a possible 500 home threshold, or 50,000 square metres of floor space, whereas at the moment we have in Haringey a threshold of 10 homes or 10,000 square metres, so basically major applications. They're looking at whether small committees might work better, They've been talking about potentially 3 or 5 members on planning committees. And they're also looking at whether unelected experts should be allowed on planning committees as per the LRDC and the OPDC model. And then the last matter is that members might have to have rather mandatory certified training. So we obviously do training here, which members attend, but the government rather are thinking about making that mandatory. So moving on to planning fees. So they are going up on the 1st of April. So last year a consultation took place that the government carried out, recognising the need for additional resources for planning authorities. And you can see from this slide that quite a number of the fees are going to actually double in price. So householders would double, 2 or more new homes that would double as well, and approval of details as well. It's good news for planning authorities who are generally under-resourced across the board, across the country. And yeah, hopefully that will give us some more coffers in our budget to deliver an even better service than we do. So that's the updates on planning reform. In terms of the applications overview, so we're looking now at the information that we have from April 24 until the end of December. So in terms of an applications overview, I'll set out some key info. So this slide shows you we've had an overall increase of 9% in applications coming in over the period, with 2,029 received compared, sorry, that was for the previous year compared to 2,216. We've also had applications on hand been affected, so that has actually fallen away slightly, and that's, I think, based on the fact that we're getting applications determined. In terms of majors, the number of majors coming in has been steadily increasing over the last number of years. There was a dip in 21-22, but now it's on the up again, and we decided 17 from April to December last year and 16 the previous year. So more good news on 2 fronts. So firstly, in terms of officers' caseload, it's around 58 applications per officer at the end of December last year. That decreased from 63 on the same period from the year before. And then the length of time it's taken to validate an application, that's actually at an average of 14 days, but that's reduced from 17 days from the previous year. But we do recognise that we need to do more work on that to make that even better. Then on to decisions. So majors are taking 2 days longer to determine at the moment. But in the overall scheme of things, that's very marginal. In terms of minors and others, compared to the previous period, they are taking 25% less time to determine. That's the bulk of our work, so that's good. Sorry, I just lost my slides there for a second. Bear with me 1 second. To find it. There, this one. I don't know. Yep. Can't seem to get them back.
That one. Oh, just reshare it, yeah.
Okay, sorry about this. I won't be a second. I'll just have to reshare. Okay. Okay, we're on track. In terms of pre-app meetings, you can see that the number that the pre-app meetings that we had in terms of fast track increased, and also in terms of the amounts of income also increased. So that's good news. April to December for fast track pre-apps again increased. Fast track certificates of lawfulness, they went down by a small number, but the fast track planning applications for householders increased, as did the fees. In terms of enforcement complaints, the number has actually dropped, as you can see, going over the year, which is good news, and the time taken to acknowledge complaints as well. Though it is up and down, it's actually doing quite well. And enforcement then cases within time, you can see that we have dealt with 37% within time, which is down from the previous year. However, we've had a significant increase in terms of enforcement cases, largely due to the HMO cases that have been referred to us by our colleagues. And that's the end of my slides. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So are there any questions, please? So Councillor Warren?
Thank you. I had two questions on kind of different topics. The first one was just about some of the changes in national policy that you were briefing us on. So with the fees increases, I just wondered, is that like blanket or is that sort of weighted? You know, does it have like a London weighting or based on geography? Is it weighted at all? And then separate question, with the kind of ongoing challenges that the landlord licensing scheme enforcement is sort of causing to capacity, I think the last time we discussed this at strategic planning, it had kind of been, you know, it had been raised as an issue, and I think we were told that there were sort of conversations ongoing as to how that could be better managed. So I just wondered if any progress has been made on that. I think one of the options was potentially whether some of the licensing income could be used on more resource. So just, yeah, if that's kind of moved along at all. Thank you.
Just before, Martin, can you turn your camera off, please? Martin, can you turn your camera off, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the planning fee increase, that is a national increase. So the same would apply to Haringey as to, you know, Planning Authority in Cumbria. It's exactly the same. However, the government are going to also give the ability to set local fees. So these fees that I talked about will be coming in April regardless. But on top of that, then there'll be next year the ability to also potentially look at increasing fees, setting them, you know, locally. So that's another opportunity, I guess, to review where we are and how much actually processing application cost Haringey compared to any other borough. And I know that Rob's been reaching out to colleagues in adjoining boroughs to see, you know, do they have a similar, you know, outlook to maybe doing something, you know, shared. So that's that. On enforcement, yes, there is a lot of pressure in the enforcement team. The number of HMO applications has meant their caseload has increased dramatically. We've been discussing that with the HMO team because we obviously need to know if they're getting a license. We need to know that so we can check if they have planning permission or not, because that's really important, so they can regularise the status of the property. And what we've agreed with them is that they will send over, you know, a case file to us. So it's not just an email to say, you know, this is a licensing issue, can you please check if it has permission? They'll send over a pack of information to us to help us speed up the process. So that's one thing that's been done to help with that. But as you know, as with the whole service, we're always looking at efficiencies and where we can improve services, and also where extra funding might be needed. So with an increase in planning fees, there is potential there use some of that money, to improve the services that we need to, including enforcement.
Sorry, was that both your questions? Yeah, okay. Councillor Rice?
Thank you. In this outline that you gave, I saw some suggestion that we will have a committee of 3 or 5 members. Are these initial sort of suggestions? Are they open to consultation and prompted in the right way? Because it doesn't seem to be a question of making only elected people who come along and be so-called experts, replace them by elected members. It can't be right.
Thank you, Councillor. I think, yeah, I guess the government are trying to see what size might fit all, but actually 3 to 5 members on a planning committee is quite small for a borough with so many people as Haringey. So I think they'll find trouble, or they'll find it difficult rather, to kind of set a blanket number, but they are looking at how they might be reduced. But that's only a government proposal, is to look at reducing the size of planning committees, I think, within an attempt to try and get decisions dealt with more swiftly. But whether they go as far as reducing it to that low number, I'd imagine probably not. And then the issue of potential proposal about using experts onto planning committees, again, it's just something the government are testing, I think, to see what responses will come back on that. It's something that's used, very, very rarely in England, with only, as I know it, 2 organisations, the MDCs, that have done that. Again, it's not it's probably not something that councils would be particularly happy with, because I think planning committee is meant to be made up of members who represent the local community. So it's something that probably the government won't take forward, I'd imagine.
Sorry, Councillor Bevan, I should have brought you in. Apologies.
Yeah, I've got 5 points. Some of them are quite small. I had to look at some of these figures for 5 minutes to try and work out whether these are calendar years, financial years, or not, especially the last column. Can that be made clearer in the future reports, whether they are calendar or financial years? Because when you look at that last column, it's 24, 25, and the other previous, I'm just wondering if you can clarify that.
But what page are you?
All of the
them.
report. It needs to be clearly, when you can read it without having to think about it, basically. Yeah. So that's a minor point. And then it goes on about a new portal for planning advice. Well, what is a portal? I'm sure if a member of the public read that, they wouldn't know what it was. And I'm guessing it's some kind of email inbox thing. But so what is a portal? That's that point. And then the experts on the committee, I suppose it hasn't been decided whether they would be voting people or actually non-voting. And then also on page 21 at the top, it goes about HMO cases. And I know we've had a huge increase in HMO planning applications. Is that relevant to that paragraph on the top of page 21? And then also it says here about the phone boxes. Some have been removed, but there's 10 on the list. We need to get all those phone boxes removed because they are an eyesore on our high streets. They're an utter disgrace. So have we got any update on that?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the performance, generally the stats are referring to comparative years, so they would be from April to December of each year. In terms of it's because what we're doing is we're reporting now on April to December because we haven't completed the 12 months. We've only done April to December. Their financial years, yes. Okay. In terms of the new portal, that is probably something. Well, it's an IT term, so I don't really know much more than that.
Yeah, just on that, it's our website. So we've updated our web pages Planning Advice Service. So yeah, you're quite right. By portal, we should just say website.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, in terms of experts on planning committee, I don't know what the government's proposal is in terms of voting. I know that LLDC and the OPDC, the Mirror Development Corporations, they were on committee as full members and they did have voting rights. So that's you know, that's the current situation, or until LLDC expired in terms of planning anyway. The phone boxes, yes, we're actively seeking their removal. I had an email the other day from BT since these papers have been printed to say they were going to remove 2 further ones. So that's on the cards at the moment. And in terms of HMOs, you talked about page 21. That refers to HMOs.
Yeah, it is reference to the issue that you raised. So
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
it's the same thing. The issue with a large number of HMO applications and that paragraph on page 21 is the same issue. It's also the same issue that Councillor Worrell was referring to about the sort of enforcement and licensing. So yeah, it's all the same issue.
Oh, I missed one thing. I noticed that on page 19 at the top, it said the number of enforcement complaints have gone up to 786 from 447. I mean, that's a huge increase. I mean, how are we dealing with that extra workload, and why is it such an increase?
It's largely an increase because of the HMO referrals, and we're managing it okay at the moment. But I think there will be pressure coming on the team relatively soon. So we do need to look at the resourcing coming forward.
Just before I bring you in, Councillor Donovan, so Councillor Brennan joined us. Councillor Brennan, do you have any declarations of interest? Do you have any declarations of interest? No. And Councillor Bartlett has joined us. Do you have any declarations of interest, Councillor Bartlett? Okay, thank you. Right, thanks, Councillor O'Donovan. Bring you in now.
It's related to the new proposals for committee sizes, and I mean, in terms of an expert, I mean, obviously the question is whether or not that person has voting rights, but obviously I think we would welcome any experts, or even more importantly, any residents to come here and give their views to the committee. The training, I think, is probably a good idea, and I think we can all, although our training at the moment is quite good and is updated, it's useful to have other training. In terms of the numbers, I think one of the strengths of this committee that we have 11 people, as the chair says, which means that we can, if today, for instance, through to illness and other reasons, we started off with 4 people not being here, it still meant we had 7 people here, and the 11 councillors represent a wide range of different areas of Haringey, and Haringey has different needs in different areas, and as councillors we can reflect that. The other point about us having 11 is that we can also have a representation of, so as you know, there's 3 groups now on the council. We can have representatives of each of those groups and hear their voices as well, which would be difficult, very difficult, with only between 3 and 5 members. So is there a way through these processes that we can actually make this committee's views known in terms of our responses to these proposals? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So yes, this is very useful feedback. We haven't done a Haringey Council response to these proposals, but we have been feeding into industry responses, so through groups such as London Councils, the Local Government Association, the Royal Town Planning Institute, Planning Officers Society, etc. And actually a lot of the things that you're raising as issues and concerns are things that we're also raising. So yes, this is very helpful feedback for us to feed into the responses to the government consultation.
Which was what is actually the motive behind this? Because it's not financial, because none of the members, apart from the chair, we don't have additional allowances for being on the committee. I suppose it could be in terms of time for each meeting may go on long if you have 11 people who have got very informed and interested questions. But I think that's the point of the chair. Always keep, even though there's 11 of us, she makes sure that the meetings don't overrun. So it's really, what is the motive of cutting committees down to 3 or 5? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Yeah, the motive, I think it's fair to say that the government has in its sights various planning committees across the country that have experienced some problems, and it's fair to say that Haringey would not be one of those. So they're looking at areas where committees decide on all sizes of application, including very small developments like householder extensions and so on. So that means they have fortnightly planning committees, things like that. So that's what the government is targeting, is having more schemes of delegation for those areas. The government has also said that there's some inconsistencies in decision making across planning committees. So developers are just not clear on where it's going to go. So I'd like to think that actually Haringey doesn't have a problem that needs to be solved. It's other committees elsewhere. We had our independent peer review just a year and a bit ago that said actually Haringey is a very well run planning committee. So the government's headline of modernising committees, I would suggest that Haringey is already a very modern planning committee. So hopefully that gives you a little bit on what is behind the government's motivation on this and what it's targeting. I don't think it's targeting a borough like Haringey with its reforms. We're doing a lot of the reforms already, just not the independent councillors and the small committee.
I've got Councillor Buxton, Councillor Brennan and Councillor Rice. I'll bring you in, Councillor Buxton.
Thanks, Chair. And on a similar point, just so I can set it in context, the threshold goes up 50% to 500 homes from 10 homes. So just in terms of what impact that would have on Haringey, do we have any like of the applications that we've looked at in the past 2 or 3 years, how many would that actually come to committee? Because that seems like a drastic reduction given the number of schemes that we've looked at.
So yeah, that threshold of 500 is a very high bar. So in Haringey, roughly 1 or 2 a year of those. So it's things like St Anne's Hospital, which is 999 homes, I think. High Road West, sort of 2,500 homes. So west of Tottenham Stadium, the Love Lane estate. Things like the Clarendon Gasworks, St William development, which went through some years ago. That's in the thousands. So yeah, it would only be 1 or 2 every year if that threshold is adopted. I would be very surprised if the government sticks with that threshold. Essentially, they're trying to keep planning committees strategic, and in a London borough, we don't have big urban extensions or new towns. That's what the government's got in mind for this. So actually, in a borough like this, our threshold is fairly sensible. We have a reasonable amount of planning applications coming to committee each month. So I suspect that threshold won't be a hard and fast rule that the government will bring in blanket across the country.
And do we have many brownfield sites in Haringey?
Yes, the vast majority are brownfield sites,
Okay.
if not all of them.
Okay. Councillor Brennan?
I was just going to say I echo what Councillor Donovan was saying and Councillor Rice about the numbers on the committee, and I do think it's important that we have representatives of the neighbourhoods on the committee, rather than just having experts who aren't sort of engaged in the communities. And I also agree with Councillor Donovan about the training. I was wondering if you might be able to put, you say you haven't given them a direct response from Haringey, could you? Would you? Is it relevant to do that, maybe?
I'm happy to have a discussion with the cabinet member to see if we want to do a Haringey specific response. I suspect most of the points that have been raised have already been raised through the sector responses that we have fed in. It's also worth saying this is one early working paper consultation. There will be many more consultations. So I think when we've got a bit more detail on the direction of travel, that might be a more fruitful time to input into the responses to the consultation. So that's probably where I am in terms of prioritising resources, but I'll certainly discuss that with the Cabinet member.
And then I had a second query, but I don't know whether we've come to this yet, which was from the whether we're meeting our demand for how many houses we're meant, our housing target. Have we not got to that yet? You know, lower down, it's on page 24. New homes.
No,
for the year.
we haven't got
that yet.
haven't got, when we get there, we'll let you know, right. And just to say that I'm very keen as well to see what the proposals are, but I think that there will be proposals come forward which we can then comment on. So let's see what happens when the initial proposals come out in the spring, which is whenever that is, whenever the spring is. So, Councillor Rice?
Entirely different subject. What I was wondering in terms of street markets, how many street markets have we got in Haringey? I know in Tottenham we got the Holcombe Road Market, but seems to be a rule unto itself. Who controls Holcombe Market?
That's probably the economic development team that manage the high streets and the market. So we wouldn't hold that information or run it. We would only get involved where they need planning permission for something, which a lot of that is under permitted development rights. It does not need planning permission. So we are not the main holders of that information. So sorry, we can't answer that tonight.
Okay, right. So moving on then, we are on page 20. Right, so we're on page 20, 22. Okay, so that's you, Bryce, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just pick a few highlights out of the spatial planning portion of this report. In terms of the new local plan, progress continues. Had some very helpful meetings at the end of last year with members of this committee who make up the member working group. The team are busy at the minute just filtering that information and that input into final draft neighbourhood sections. The key thing to note at this time on the new local plan is that we've got a revised timetable that's going to be set out in a new local development scheme. I won't go over all the details now because we've got a separate item on that this evening. But in December, the Deputy Prime Minister asked all local authorities to publish a new local plan timetable, or LDS, by the 6th of March. So we've been very busy in that regard. A couple of benefits of a slight delay in the local plan process. One is it's given us a full opportunity to consider the planning reforms which were announced at the end of last year in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework. And the second one is that it enables us to have closer alignment with the next London plan, which the Mayor of London and his team at the GLA are busy preparing. In terms of some of the planning reforms that affect the spatial planning service, one of the key ones in December were changes to the government's planning policy for traveller sites. So the government has the NPPF. It sets out its planning policies for gypsies and travellers in a separate document. There was a fairly significant change to the definition of gypsies and travellers in December. Previously, the planning definition for gypsy and traveller need was limited to gypsies and travellers who are effectively nomadic. Not a lot of gypsy and travellers are because there aren't many sites, which is one of the principal barriers to that. But that definition has now been changed, and that means that going forward we'll need to seek to meet the need for all gypsies and travellers who are culturally nomadic, and that includes a lot of people who live in bricks and mortar accommodation. So we're just working through that at the moment. In terms of the NPPF, one of the key changes was around the government's standard method for housing needs, and this is the formula that the government use to calculate housing need for local planning authorities. For most local plan authorities, that has quite significant implications, although it's slightly different in London because our housing needs figure, our housing target is set through the London plan rather than specifically through the standard method for housing need. And the key thing to note is that the standard method for housing need sets a much higher housing target going forward for London as a whole. So there is going to be a significant push for housing. I'm on airplane mode. That's better, yeah. Sorry about that. I was speaking about the increase in housing need for London. The current need figure for housing in London is around 66,000. The London plan seeks to deliver just over 50,000, and the delivery level in London over the last few years has been closer to 30 to 35,000 homes. So it's already a significant challenge meeting that need. Now, the government's formula for housing needs says that London will need to deliver 88,000 homes a year over the next 10 years. So that is a 2.5 to 3-fold increase in what we're currently delivering. So there'll be significant challenges for the Mayor of London in that regard. But the likely consequence for London boroughs, including Haringey, is that our housing target will increase in the next London plan, which I'll come on to shortly. Councillor Brennan mentioned around the housing delivery test measurement. So the government has an annual measurement looking at how housing delivery compares to housing targets. Haringey is performing quite well in this regard. So our measurement over the last 3 years is 99%. There's no consequence for Haringey. There are no positives of meeting it, but we avoid any of the negative implications in that regard. So that's considered quite good performance. Now, I mentioned also around the next London plan. So you'll be very familiar with the London Plan 2021. The shelf life of that plan is 5 years. So that takes that plan to March 2026. So the Mayor of London has initiated the process of preparing a new London plan. Key milestones to note at the minute. Next month, the Mayor of London is due to publish a policy document of some form, although there's potential it may be slightly delayed. And that will start to look at options and opportunities for the future planning of London, but particularly to address challenges of the increased housing need per the government's housing need formula. They're looking to provide authorities or London boroughs with an indication later this year of our likely housing target that we need to meet in our local plans. And they're looking to get a draft London plan out for consultation at the start of next year. That's likely to be published before the local government elections, with consultation taking place shortly thereafter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buxton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the table at the top of page 24. So just looking through these numbers, and I know that the final one is TBC, but all of the London numbers seem to go up by 50% or so, whereas all the Haringey numbers seem to go up by almost 100%. So it seems like we're taking quite a lot of the burden for, or disproportionately compared to other boroughs in London. So why is it so high, and do we have any influence over that?
Thank you. So we don't have any influence over that. It's quite a transparent formula, but a large part of the formula relates to affordability of housing in relation to, I think it's median earnings. So affordability varies across London. There are inner London boroughs like Kensington and Chelsea, for instance, where the jump is astronomical. Ours is probably somewhere in the middle, but it is a fairly transparent formula based upon evidenced information.
Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, just about the traveller sites and the redefinition of a traveller, because I know our two sites in Haringey are both substantially substandard, to be quite honest. And I know there was a plan some time ago to complete one new site, one larger site, where those substandard sites could be closed. And one site would mean the possibility of delivering services all in one place. So I'm just putting that into the officer's mind, because I think that would be a great improvement to those two existing sites if we could do that. And then one question, I know there was a proposal that would mean that there would be less social housing in the West, which we've raised before in previous, I know this local plan thing's been going on, but we've raised it before, that a proposal would mean actually that there would be less social housing in the West, which I've got real concerns. I wouldn't be happy with that if that was going to proceed. Can you comment on that?
So thank you. I'll take the second point first around social housing. We're proposing that our affordable housing targets and policies would be consistent across the entire borough. There'd be no variation between the west, the centre of the borough and the east. If anything, we'll be looking to increase social housing delivery in the west of the borough through identifying more sites and more opportunities. So that's definitely our ambition. And then in relation to the Gypsy Traveller needs and meeting that need, there's going to be major challenges in meeting the need figure because it's going to be much higher than we've tried to meet previously. The housing delivery team have fairly recently consulted on 3 new Gypsy Traveller sites, I think for a total of 6 pitches. That will go a significant way towards meeting part of that need. But I think there will be difficulty in identifying further sites, particularly of a large scale. But nonetheless, that's a challenge for our team that we'll take on fully.
Yeah, so what you say about the social housing, there'd be one standard for the whole borough. At the present, there's not one standard. The existing standard promotes more social housing in the West. So what you're actually saying is that's going to be abolished, and you're just hoping to provide more social housing in the West. That in the West, that's what you're actually saying. I've got real concerns with that.
So currently there is a different tenure mix between the borough and the Tottenham AAP area. What we're proposing is to have a single tenure mix across the entire borough, and that tenure mix will be either 60-40 in favour of social rent or possibly 70-30. So we'll certainly be moving in the direction of more social housing rather than less in terms of the affordable housing policy itself. And yes, as you said, we don't know what developments will come forward in the borough exactly in the future, but we'll be seeking to bring more forward, which hopefully will see an increased level of social housing delivery overall.
Councillor Brennan?
Yeah, I'm in favour of increasing social housing throughout the borough. So I don't understand the criteria that's currently applied where we don't produce as much social housing in the east simply because that's where it's needed. And I do rather feel we should just try and supply it everywhere. In fact, I think there's a crucially massive need of social housing throughout the borough. So I'm very much in favour of it everywhere as much as possible.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll note that comment. I'm not proposing a debate on that. I think that's more of a debate that we have in our different groups. But Councillor Buxton?
Sorry, Chair, you might be mad at me because it might be just extending the debate. But given the answer to my previous question on the affordability of other boroughs like Kensington and Chelsea, the affordability of land in the west and the east is, as I understand it, fairly different. That's what makes it so hard to build so many social homes in the west. So why is it's a difficult conversation, the conversation that we have every single time. But if the target is to deliver now, we're aiming for almost twice as many homes. Where does that happen? I'm not suggesting that what my colleagues are saying is wrong. I agree that we need more social housing in in the West, but we also have a waiting list of 11,000 for social homes. So how do we square the circle on delivering the homes that we need at affordable prices within budgets that we've got? And, you know, given the response to affordability in places like Kensington and Chelsea that don't have to do this, apparently, I'm singling out them. But, you know, sorry, that was my rant and vague question. Chair, don't worry about a response. I just needed to.
I'm not really sure what the question is. I mean, I think you're more or less just saying what Councillor Brennan's saying, and so I think we'll note that point, because yeah, I think that there's a discussion to be had on all of that in our different groups. So right, Councillor Bartlett. Sorry, what did you say? Well, you know, there you go. This isn't a Labour group meeting, this is a strategic planning. Right, Councillor Bartlett, and I've got you down, Councillor Watt.
Thank you. On the housing delivery test measurement, I may just not have understood the table, but was there a real decrease? Is the decrease in 2022, 23, is that a lag from COVID, or is there a particular reason for that compared to the previous years? And is there a sort of sense of where we are currently in terms of that, our progress on that?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of the requirement in 2021 and 21-22 is lower than our ordinary housing target. And the reason for this is because we were during COVID and we were given a little bit of a grace in terms of the figure that we needed to meet. And that partly explains why our figure of 99% is so good. So there's no longer any grace due to COVID. So we're expected to meet the full target. The 1564 figure is a bit spurious. It should be 1592. The government is wrong on that account. In terms of completions, I think anything around 1,000 is generally good. That is a significant number of new homes based upon the historic record of delivery in this borough. As you'll be aware, housing delivery is always a bit lumpy for a variety of reasons. To note, last year, so for 23-24, that's not included within here, but will be next year, I think delivery was somewhere over, just over 1,000. So we're still around the area, but the figure next year might drop from 99% to something a little bit lower. But there are a lot of challenges in delivering 1,600 homes a year in this borough, not least that it's fundamentally outside of the council's control. We grant a significant number of permissions. The extent to which they come forward and the rate at which they come forward is out of our control to a large extent, which is one of the major complaints about the housing delivery test from our borough and for a lot of other boroughs.
Just on that as well, the description of the year, is that the year in which they started or the year in which they're completed, or how does that relate?
So this is new homes completed per financial year.
Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the local plan, I find it a shame because obviously I feel like we've had glimpses of how good the new local plan is going to be, and we're kind of still being forced to work off the old out-of-date one when we make decisions which don't really serve our kind of current priorities for the borough. So I appreciate the reasons for the further delays, but it is a real shame. So I guess my first question is just kind of, given how much the goalposts have shifted kind of every single time we've looked at it, how sure can we be about the new timeline for delivery, particularly given, I guess, that we know that this government are kind of doing a lot on planning reform. Yeah, how sort of set is the new time frame would be my first question. And then just picking up a point which I think was in one of the other reports in the agenda pack, but relates to the local plan. Obviously, when some of the engagement that was done happened quite a while ago now, there's the risk that it becomes somewhat obsolete because it was so long ago. Again, which would be a real shame because of like the awards that the team won for the early engagement. So I'm wondering whether that is the case, or kind of how can that still be made use of? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very fair points. We're just as keen to see the draft local plan published as you are. There's been an extensive amount of work being done. We're in a position now where we can commit to an early summer date for Cabinet, so it will be going to Cabinet. The LDS, the local development scheme, does reflect what we consider to be a reasonable yet ambitious timescale for taking a local plan forward. We have had resource challenges in the team over the last few years. That's picked up in the planning audit. We've also tried to do a lot of money in-house, a lot of work in-house to reduce the cost of the council of the plan. And then there's also the fact that we've tried to be fairly trailblazing in a lot of respects, which requires time, energy, and a lot of consideration. So we're confident that we'll be able to bring it forward soon, and it will be a good quality plan, and that it will be future-proofed to take account of new London plan changes, increased housing targets. We've done a lot of good work in that regard. In terms of the engagement, thank you for noting the fact that we did some really good engagement, but we do recognise that was some time ago. I do think most of that engagement feedback is still relevant and still helpful. In addition, we've been liaising closely with other services in the council to understand the feedback they've had to key bits of work they've done, like the housing strategy, like the inclusive economy strategy, like the Haringey Borough Vision. So I think we will be aligned in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Right, so are we on to, have you, page 26, building control. Thank you, Bryce, for that report. So I'm handing over to Rob Shizowski there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will cover this item as Dennis Ioannou, the head of building control, is on well-deserved annual leave. So you've got the report in front of you from page 26 to 27. So firstly, great news, the Building Control Service was a finalist in the LABC awards for Team of the Year. Didn't quite clinch the win, but really great to be on that finalist list. So that was really good recognition for the team in a challenging year. In terms of numbers of building control applications, we are slightly down on previous years. That is largely down to the fact that the new building safety regulator full powers took effect in this financial year, and that essentially means that those higher rise buildings that are in scope for the building safety regulator go to the National Building Safety Regulator. They don't come to us as a council. Anything across the country above 7 stories at 18 metres goes to a national body now. So that's part of the reason for the drop and the decline in market share, but nothing more significant or worrying, we don't think, than that. And then the key thing as well with the ongoing reforms, which are still continuing, so we're still getting new legislation and regulation coming out of the government on a regular basis, but the team are doing a really good job of keeping on top of that. We've talked before in this meeting about the job profiles of the staff and making sure that they are updated to recognise the qualifications that are required, the competencies from the building safety regulator, and the ability to work in a new regulated profession. So it is now a regulated profession, similar to doctors and lawyers. You have to have certain competencies to actually practice in it. So we have now completed the job profile updates. They've all been job evaluated. That has all gone out for staff consultation. That consultation has now closed. That closed a couple of weeks ago. And I'm just working through that to turn it around and complete that restructure. But generally, it is should be good news in that we will have a net increase in the number of permanent posts available in the team, and we can do more permanent recruitment to those posts at the right salary level to make sure to replenish our staff numbers after a few retirements around about a year ago. So yes, we've got those posts established. The restructure consultation is finished, and I'll be recruiting to those posts on a permanent basis as quickly as possible. So that's the end of that building control update. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Councillor Bevan?
Right, so when those news posts start, can you send us an email that they've all commenced on this date, so that we know it doesn't drag out again for any reason? And then how many vacancies have we got in building control at the moment? And then I'm aware that the government agency, the Building Safety Regulator, now has a 35-week delay, at least. In fact, I don't think they're dealing with any applications because they've just been set up. They've got no staff. So all our projects, I think, over 8 stories, including 2 tower blocks in Northumberland Park, are now delayed for over 35 weeks when the residents were told they were going to start quite soon. And I understand the new build on Broadwater Farm is also all now delayed. Have you got any comment on the new Building Service Regulator, this new agency that the government has set up?
Yes, thank you. So firstly, yes, happy to let committee know when we go out for advert on the new posts. I'll let you know when they're ready and set up and go out to advert, and when we recruit as well. So I'm happy to do that. And thanks for your interest in the team. I don't have the number in terms of vacancies in front of me, but we basically, in the pure builder control bit of the service, we have 3 permanent people, and we want to increase that to something like 10 to 15 with the restructure. So that's roughly the figures. We do have agency people in some of those posts for the time being, but the plan is to move towards permanent staff as part of this restructure. So we should be able to fill those vacancies. It will still be a challenge and we'll never fully fill everything, but that's the plan, and the restructure puts us in a good position for that, so I can minimise the vacancies. And in terms of the Building Safety Regulator, you're absolutely right. There's been delays across the country in terms of applications being determined by the Building Safety Regulator. It's a problem in the industry at the moment. The BSR only sort of took its formal powers around about April last year. So to be fair, it's a sort of new body that's still finding its feet, and it hasn't quite got all the wheels in motion yet, if we're completely honest about it. That has certainly been raised with the government, and I've raised it myself actually with the chief planner of the government, saying, you know, if you want to get housing going, you need to get all the wheels in motion. So they've definitely heard that from people like me and people in the industry. There is some good news. Just a week or 2 ago, the government did announce, I think it was an extra £1 million for the Building Safety Regulator. So they have acknowledged as a problem. There is some money that they've realised that needs to go towards this to get some of those applications unlocked, because it is becoming a little bit of a bottleneck at the national level. All these high-rise schemes going to one body that's new nationally in very complex work. We do play a role as a local authority builder control service in that, though. So yes, they go to the Building Safety Regulator, but they then come to local authorities for local expertise. So we then contribute via that route. So it goes nationally and then comes back down locally. So so we do play our part in that, and we're lucky that we have 3 or 4 qualified, competent people with the appropriate qualifications. So we play our part in trying to help with that. But you're right, there has been a problem. The government have acknowledged it, and they are putting some more money into it.
Councillor Donovan?
Okay, thank you. My question is related to tall buildings, not the structure themselves, but the problems caused by structures of 1 or 2 close together, and that's particularly generating wind tunnels. And obviously we're having a lot higher winds particularly this year, but I'm sure it will go on into the future. And there's a couple of places in Tottenham Hale where residents have expressed concern that in certain areas next to very tall buildings there is excessive updraft. Is that it may be something incredibly difficult to resolve, but is that something building control would look at?
Yeah, good question. So it's not a builder control issue as such, it is more of a planning issue. So so in planning policy, there are policies basically requiring developers to provide microclimate assessment. So looking at things like wind, the comfort level as a pedestrian walking or cycling or whatever adjacent to the building, looking at the different comfort levels and comfort tolerances, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So we do have some existing policies on that, but through the new local plan, we will be enhancing our policies on that and using London Plan policy and guidance on tall buildings which does strengthen the requirements on developers. So for major planning applications where we have tall buildings, we do ask at a very early stage from the developer things like microclimate assessment, wind assessment, comfort level at the pedestrian level, so that from a very early stage in the design, it's designed to build that in using all sorts of interesting design techniques to minimize the impact of the downdrafts on people. So absolutely, it's a live issue. Appreciate there are some issues in Tottenham Hale, but it's one that yourself and other colleagues have raised. So it's definitely something we're close to.
Okay, thank you. So that's the report. There's that's the whole report. There's page 29, the definition of categories of development, which is part of that report. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll now move to the recommendation, and that's that this report be noted. So do we note this report? Great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So we're now moving on to internal audit planning, pages 31 to 52. And that's Rob. Yeah, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, from page 31 onwards. So as you'll be aware, the council has a routine audit plan which covers all services at some point in time. So in September of 2024, it was the turn of planning to go through an internal audit process. Confusingly, the internal audit is done by external consultants called Forvis Mazars, but that's just the process. So the report was completed in the autumn. The report went to audit committee in December, and it's provided to you today for information. On page 32, there's a summary of the recommendations, and in the appendix, there's the detailed management responses to those recommendations and what our actions are. But just to give you the sort of 4 headlines of that, the first recommendation and action is about publishing authority monitoring reports, which are like an annual report on things like housing target, housing delivery, some of what's been discussed already, the housing numbers. So we're committed to bringing us up to speed on those to fill some gaps there. Number 2 is the local plan timetable that you've already discussed some of that already. Number 3 is about appeal information, putting that into the Strategic Planning Committee report. We actually actioned that for the last Strategic Planning Committee report in October, I think it was. So that's already been actioned and is in your latest report today as well. And number 4 was about statutory deadlines for planning application decisions. So having a few internal sort of IT mechanisms with our system to remind case officers and managers and have a dashboard about when an application is going to be overdue. So that's all been actioned and implemented to date as well. So yeah, those are the headline recommendations and actions, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Councillor Warren.
Thank you. Yeah, the report all seems good, and like minor concerns were raised and we're acting on them. I just wondered if you could clarify, I just couldn't quite understand from the text why we hadn't been producing authority monitoring reports. It seemed like it was something to do with like an old system, but I just couldn't really understand. Like, would you be able to clarify that, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll ask my colleague Bryce to come in, but I would also say it's partly about resource as well, and having to prioritise resource, and I just have to sometimes make a decision on to prioritise something over something else. So we didn't prioritise the authority monitoring report in previous years in terms of resource. We can now prioritise that, and there are also issues with the London Data Hub, which Bryce will talk through.
I'm not an IT expert, so I'll caveat my response with that first. So up until about 4 years ago, the GLA carried out monitoring via something called the London Development Database, LDD for short. Now, that was a very fancy system which pulled lots and lots of data out of the planning portal and enabled us to very quickly and easily understand what was happening in the borough in terms of a whole variety of things. They made the decision about 5 years ago to move from that to a new PLD, Planning London Data Hub, which was advertised as being really fantastic, which it has the potential to be. But us along with a number of other boroughs, had some teething issues in terms of how the PLD, the new system, communicated with their own planning system. And they took the better part of 3 years to resolve, at which point we had a backlog of 3 years of planning information. Now, we don't have the capacity to do a manual authority monitoring report because that is a extremely extensive task. So we've been hostage to the issues being fixed with the translation between our system and the GLAs. They're now fixed, so we're in a position to move forward with that. In addition, we've got a vacant role in the team that we're hoping to repurpose soon to be a full-time monitoring and data role. So hopefully this is an area where we can be really strong going forward, recognising that there's so much data out there and we want to make best use of that.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No? Okay, so we now move to the recommendation, and the recommendation is that the report be noted. Do we agree to note this report? Thank you. Okay, thank you. So on to item 9, which is Haringey Local Development Scheme, pages 53 to 68, and that's over to you, Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just summarise this report. So the council is required by law to publish what's called a local development scheme, and a local development scheme sets out the timetable for the production of local plan documents. We have a published LDS that dates to, I think, about 2017, so quite some time ago, and it's now quite out of date. Now, in December, alongside the variety of planning reforms that were announced, there was a request from the Deputy Prime Minister that all local authorities in the country update their local development scheme by the 6th of March. So that was a good reminder that we needed to do it. So we are in the process of taking forward a proposed revised local development scheme to Cabinet. That will go to Cabinet on, I believe, March the 18th. So what you've got in front of you today is the report which we're proposing to take to Cabinet, and we're sharing that with you for noting and with a request for you to agree that to go forward to Cabinet as set out in para 3.2 of the report. So the key things to note in terms of the LDS, the previously published LDS addressed both our local plan, the Wood Green Area Action Plan, and the North London Waste Plan. Now, the new revised LDS, or the revised new LDS, which is appended here, that no longer includes the North London Waste Plan that was adopted in 2022. There's currently no plan for the North London Waste Authorities to prepare a new waste plan, so that's removed. For some time, we've been clear that we proposed to roll the Wood Green Area Action Plan, or what was the draft action plan, into a consolidated local plan. So that's what we're proposing to do. So this LDS only addresses the new local plan, and it sets out timescales for the key steps. The major milestone, the next major milestone is consultation on a draft local plan, which we're proposing to take place from July to September of this year. That will mean going to Cabinet in June and seeking their approval to consult. What we'd then be looking to do is have a fairly quick turnaround between the draft local plan consultation and going back to Cabinet for them to approve the proposed submission plan, and this is the plan that the council wants to adopt. So we'll be seeking to take the proposed submission plan back to Cabinet early next year before the pre-election period begins. And then we'd be looking to consult on the, or seek representation on the proposed submission plan after the local government elections in 2026, and then take that forward to submit to the Planning Inspectorate to undertake an examination, and we'd be looking at adoption in 2027, early on. So that's the report in a nutshell. So it's a timetable for the new local plan. It's slightly updated versus what you've seen previously, albeit the delay is not significant. Next major milestone is a draft local plan, which we'll be consulting on this summer, and then we'll be moving forward in a fairly fast way in 2026.
Any questions or clarification? Yeah, Councillor Brown.
I was just wondering if you could expand on what you said about bringing the Wood Green project forward.
Yeah, happy to. Some councils choose to prepare a suite of local plan documents, as we currently have. Around 5 years ago, there was a move back to producing consolidated local plans where all these documents are rolled into one. So we've gone down that route of having a comprehensive local plan for the entire borough. There was a lot of work undertaken around 2013 to 2018 on the Wood Green Area Action Plan. That was held up to a large extent by delays in decisions over Crossrail 2, and you'll know Crossrail 2 is paused completely. There's no work currently happening on that. So in the absence of a decision around that, and that was going to have very significant implications for Wood Green, and due to limited resources in the team, which meant we were going to struggle to twin track an area action plan plus a local plan, we made the decision that Wood Green would be folded into the local plan. And as you've seen at the member working group, we've done some detailed work on a Wood Green neighbourhood, sort of sit alongside other neighbourhoods within the local plan.
Councillor Bird.
So are the sites for Crossrail still designated? You still can't do anything with them. They've got to stay there empty until something happens with Crossrail, if ever.
You are correct to an extent. So there is legal safeguarding of certain sites for Crossrail 2 purposes, which is having some impacts on development being able to come forwards. There are opportunities in the meantime on some of those sites to bring forward meanwhile development, but there are issues with some sites being blighted for possibly quite a long period of time. There are a number of London boroughs who are very concerned about this because they've got extensive Crossrail safeguarding. We haven't got extensive safeguarding, but still there are impacts. So we're looking at that closely. I'm aware there's ongoing discussions between government and between government and TfL around adjusting the safeguarding restrictions because there's some sites that are unnecessarily safeguarded. It's quite a complicated process, I understand, to get the safeguarding change requiring sign off of Number 10, the Treasury and Department for Transport. So it might be a little while.
Okay, any more questions? No? Okay. So we'll move to the recommendation, and the recommendation is to note the content of this report and the appended LDS. So do we agree? Do we agree to refer this report and the appended local development scheme to the Cabinet with a recommendation to adopt the local development scheme? Are we all in agreement with that? Agreed? Okay, thank you. So on to item 10, and that's items of urgent business, of which there have been none, and the date of the next meeting is to be confirmed. So thank you very much and good evening, everybody. Thank you.